What happened?
Man, my purse, my horse, boots, and what he wanted besides.
Don't leave me.
I won't. You're safe now.
Never thought building could feel like healing.
Every board remembers who raised it.
Dawn opened like a raw eyelid over the desert, the light a pale ache along the far blue rim. The night's scream had already drained into the sand. What lingered was the after-sound silence that pressed against the ears, until a person could hear the dust moving. Abel Kane reined to a stop where the creek ought to be. It was nothing now but a cracked ribbon through greasewood and mesquite, its bed gritted with bone-white stones. Wind moved over it, slow as breath. He had not ridden this way in years. The old cabin crouched a mile east, sunstruck, and silvered the roofline slumped like a tired spine. He'd built it with his wife the year the rain ran strong, and the cottonwoods held nests like cupped hands. He hadn't crossed that threshold since the night her voice thinned to a thread and snapped childbirth blood, the cruel mathematics of loneliness. He had left the place to weather and time. Let it carry the weight he could not. A vulture corkscrewed above the arroyo. Abel shaded his eyes. At first he thought the shape below was a sag of old tarp or a spill of shadow from the broken bank. Then it moved. An elbow, a cheekbone against dust. A woman, maybe 25, maybe more, turned wrong by hunger, so that years were hard to count. A strip of sky-blue cloth clung to her shoulder, shredded. One foot was bare, the other wrapped in a rag held by thorns. No hat, no canteen. She had the look of a person past the argument with herself, past pride, past asking. Abel swung down. His knees stiff with age and weather complained. He ignored them. Up close, he could see the bruises seeded across her cheek and along the collarbone. Old and new, some yellowing, some a fresh wine purple. Someone had used his hands where God never meant hands to be used. The woman's eyes slitted. They were dark like the water in a stone cup, deep and tired. Her lips moved. The voice gone sand-dry. "I can't hold it in anymore," she breathed, and then nothing like the words took the last coin from her. Abel unslung the canteen. "Easy," he said, not to her exactly, but to the moment. The first splash across her tongue shocked her body. She coughed, tried to drink, and breathe at once failed. He tilted, waited, tilted again. The second taste went down easier. One swallow. Two. The throat worked stubborn and beautiful, like a horse that wouldn't kneel. Only after the edge came off the thirst did the shaking begin. He put his coat over her shoulders and watched the shivers travel through. Wind lifted a thin lock of hair at her temple. It was raven black with red-brown sunburn at the ends, a color that belonged to this country. "What happened?" Abel asked softly. "Man," she said. "Brent." The name landed like phlegm. "My purse. My horse. Boots." Her mouth twisted, and what he wanted besides. Abel let the anger come and pass. It would not help her to see it. "Can you stand? Don't leave me," she whispered, and then with a flash of reckless shame, "I'll do anything." He had been a young man once. The body remembers its stupid hunger even when a heart is old. Abel took a breath and set the canteen between them, a small, clean border. "No bargains," he said. "Just water. Then shade. That's all." He lifted her by the armpits, careful as if he were lifting a wounded hawk from wire. She was lighter than she should have been. Her breath, close to his neck for a moment, carried the metallic sweetness of fever. He set her on the horse and started toward the old cabin because the body knows the path to its ghosts. They rode without talking. The desert spoke instead, a grasshopper ticking the wheel squeak of a far windmill, the thin cry of a hawk peeling the vault of sky. Abel felt the cabin before he saw it, the way a man can feel a scar under winter clothing. He kept his eyes on the ground until shadow slid over them, and wood smell pressed the air. Inside, dust made everything soft around the edges. An old table wore the print of a long-vanished bowl. The bed frame waited without its mattress. He'd burned that the night after the burial because no one should have to sleep with breath still caught in the fibers. The room held the taste of smoke and old pine, and the far-off hint of a woman's laughter he had spent a decade trying not to hear. He laid the stranger on a folded horse blanket and propped her shoulders. The shivers came like waves and ebbed. "Name?" he asked when her eyes steadied. She looked at the wall, not at him. "Mara. Mara, what just Mara," she said, and shut her eyes like a door. He went out to the lean-to, found dry kindling shingled beneath the eaves, and coaxed a small fire into the rusted stove. The first catch of flame sounded like breath returning. He had coffee beans in his saddlebag, a few onions shriveled to sweetness, jerky hardened to stone. He shaved the meat, thin-boiled the water, cut the onion into the pot, and waited until the room began to smell like something human. When he brought the tin cup to her lips, Mara flinched, then made herself still. She drank in small animal sips, each one a promise that tomorrow might exist. "You don't owe me," Abel said. It surprised him that he said it. He had not been owed anything, not by the land, not by the law, not by God, in a long time. She looked at him sideways. "Folks don't do things for free out here." "That's so," he said, and stirred the pot again. He was not sure if he believed his own decency anymore, but he could choose it minute by minute. That would be enough for now. The wind shouldered the walls. Light thinned. Evening climbed through the empty window. Abel put another log in the fire and took the old chair by the door, the one that had never learned to be comfortable. He pulled his hat down over his eyes and told himself he would stay awake. He did not. The body kept its own counsel. He slept with his hands folded palm up like a man who expected nothing. When Mara woke, after the first night, she found the rancher mending a saddle strap, his head bowed in concentration, the little lines at his eyes soft with the work. He looked like men at sunrise everywhere, a body tied to labor, a mind keeping the tally of things that might be fixed today, and things that could not. "Where am I?" she asked, and the words came out like a child's. "An old place," he said. "Was mine. Was my wife's. Is just a roof today." She took that in. The corner of the room smelled of rain, though there was no rain. There was a bundle on a peg by the door, a woman's shawl faded to a weary rose that had once been bold as a wound. Everything in the cabin had an echo. He cooked a thin broth and set it in front of her, then receded a half step. Not chivalry, not fear. Just the space that lets hunger be about food and not about power. She ate without looking up. "You came from town?" he asked. She nodded. "Before that, the line camp. Before that, a house, after my mother died. Before that?" She trailed. The past felt like someone else's reins. "What are you?" She flinched. People asked the question in a dozen ways. Half-breed, squaw, white trash. He said it plain, but without blade to it. "My mother was mescalero," she said, voice level. "My father, sometime hand who left when he learned how to spell my name. I learned to sew from a woman who called me girl for 3 years before she let me tell her the name my mother gave me. I learned to ride from a boy who thought he loved me until his uncle told him better. I learned how men laugh when you say no." Abel nodded once. The information did not change what he had already decided. "You're safe here," he said. "From what?" she asked. "From last night," he said. "From the man who hit you. From the emptiness." It was the last word that loosened something in her. Emptiness. No law to catch you when you fell, no hand unless it was closed. Out here, a person could die of lack without anyone noticing, and Abel spoke as if that were a kind of violence too. That day he asked her to do small things. Rinse the cup, hang the pot, fold the blanket when the sun reached the western notch in the wall. She did what she could, slow between spells of dizziness. When the fever rolled back over her, he set a cool cloth at her temple and did not watch her face. The courtesy meant more than medicine. By nightfall she could sit on the threshold. The sky was a bruise fading to milk. Wind pushed the smell of creosote through the gap in the boards. Abel brought coffee and his silence. That was what he had to share. "What's your name?" she asked. "Abel Kane." She almost laughed. "Sounds like a sermon." "I've been both," he said. They did not speak again for some time. Coyotes stitched the horizon with small, sorrowful sounds. Stars came on one by one, and Mara thought of the way her mother used to name them, not by saints or generals, but by useful things. Fire, rain, needle, bread. She tested the old words in her mouth. and found she could still say them even if no one answered anymore. When the cold began to climb, Abel stood and went inside. He came back with a wool coat and held it out. She wore it and felt the lining hold a memory of someone smaller. It did not shame her that she could not fill it. It comforted her that someone had once. Before sleep, the old nightmare came, a door that would not shut, hands that would not soften. Brent's laugh like a hinge grinding. She started up, breath harsh. The chair creaked. Abel was already standing, hat in hand, as if to show he had no weapons left. "He'll come," Mara said. The certainty chilled the air. "I know," Abel said, and the fact that he did not with drama, but with a working man's acceptance, steadied her better than any promise could. He set his hat back down and resumed his patient guard of the night. 3 days put some color back into her. The bruises yellowed the cuts, knit at their edges, the bones under her eyes stopped casting the hard shadow of want. She moved more in the room. She found a bucket and carried it out to the old cistern and found at the very bottom a finger of water sweet enough to taste of tin. She washed the tin cups with sand and Sunday. She mended a shirt. She gathered the courage to re-enter the house without the feeling that she was borrowing someone else's breath. Abel came and went through the door like weather. He never hurried. He did not ask about the worst. The questions he favored were the humble ones. Have you eaten? Did the stove draw? Can you sleep? In his hands, survival was not a grand gesture but a sequence of small accuracies. When he spoke of a thing, he did it. When he said he'd be back before dark, he was. The land had not always been that honest with her. On the 4th morning, he asked her to ride with him into town. "We need supplies. You need a pair of boots that fit your feet, and not your fear." She hesitated. The thought of faces of talk tightened something behind her ribs. But she climbed into the wagon and kept her eyes on the horizon line where the land met sky, and nothing pressed its will upon anything else. The town existed because somebody made a foolish bet with distance and won. A few false front buildings held up the idea of permanence. Windows watched the street. A windmill shouted its tired hymn. Men leaned where they could lean, chewing, measuring, calling things by their cheapest names. Brent found them before she found her breath. He did not come alone. Men like him don't. They come ringed by laughter. "Well, look what we got," he said. His grin never reached his eyes. Meanness sat back there like a dog taught to sit and not to heel. "Didn't think you'd crawl that far, girl." Mara tried to keep her face dull. The trick of surviving a crowd is to look like it would be boring to hurt you. But her body remembered before her mind. Her hands trembled. She hated it, the betrayal of flesh. "You stole my money," she said. "My horse." The words tasted like rust. Brent's smile widened. "Your memory's bad," he said, lifting his voice for the bystanders. "She took my purse while I slept. The horse came with wages I was owed." The way the crowd leaned told her the lie was sufficient for their hunger. Abel's hand came to rest lightly on the wagon rail. He did not reach for a gun. He just straightened his back. Brent stepped close. When he raised his hand lazy like a habit, Abel's arm caught his wrist in midair. The stopping was quiet. The street went silent because simple decency done cleanly is a kind of shock. "That's enough," Abel said. The sheriff cleared the corner boots loud to disguise his uncertainty. He took in the tableau and fell back on the law's worst tool equivalents. "2 stories," he said, as if saying it made him wise. "No proof." Everyone cooled down. Brent dropped his hand. He mouthed something he thought looked like victory and backed away, but his eyes had a new edge. Humiliation is a stubborn fuel. It burns long and smokes thicker than a mesquite stump. Mara watched the smoke follow them back out of town. They did not talk on the ride home. The land did the talking, grass, the color of old brass, a hawk that wouldn't waste a wing beat, a cloud shadow tall as a church. Mara leaned her head against the wagon's sideboard and let the wheel's rhythm tell her she was moving away from the center of other people's stories. She wanted to believe that mattered. That night, Abel walked the fence line after supper. He checked the wire. He checked the gate. He stood and listened until the listening had a shape. Only then did he go inside. Mara was darning by lamplight, the thread moving in and out like breath. "I'm not worth a bullet," she said to the cloth. It wasn't self-pity. It was information she had been taught since she could have been anything else. "Don't say small things to yourself," Abel said. "I've run out of larger ones," she said. He took that in, nodded. He sat not too close and worked the leather through the awl. Outside, the wind turned a page only the horizon could read. Inside, heat held steady, a thrift of comfort and trust small, as seedlight, as ash, found a place in the room where it would not be blown away. The trouble didn't announce itself with music. It came like weather does first, a feeling on the skin, then the smell, then the thing itself. Abel woke to the silence that means someone is listening to your house. He put 2 fingers to his lips and pinched the lamp out. The dark felt good. He could see again. In the yard, moonlight cut silver squares across the packed dirt. Between them moved shadows. 2 men, knives none too bright. Brent's whisper canted low. "Come out, old man. She's mine." Ownership laid like a stain on the syllables. Abel carried the shotgun but held it like a staff. "You take one more step," he said, voice low, so it traveled flat, "and we learn what you're willing to lose." Brent laughed. The second man went for the gate. He kicked it to swing it wide and learned a lesson Abel had set 10 minutes after supper. A loop of rope on the inside caught his ankle and threw him pig-hard into the dirt. He swore. Brent lunged to help him, and in that mess of motion, Abel moved without hurry. He raised the stock and brought it down across Brent's ribs just hard enough to change a man's plans. A knife flashed. It opened Abel's sleeve and left a red wet stripe down the arm. Pain folded the limb strange for a moment. He didn't notice. He brought the butt down again, jaw this time clean as chopping a root. Mara stood in the shadow of the door. She did not call out. She did not cry. She watched, learning the geometry of the yard, the way light fell, the way men fell, the way a choice once made can't be unmade. Neighbors came, called by the particular sound of men hitting dirt. Someone shouted for the sheriff. Brent swore without invention. Abel tied his hands with an old fence rope, neat work, like a man remembering the knot you use for something you have to trust. When law finally arrived, the proof had the decency to show itself: knives' footprints, where they shouldn't be blood, where it belonged to the wrong person. Brent went off cursing. The sheriff gave Abel the hell-soft nod men give when they don't quite know how to say thank you without unbuttoning their authority. After the crowd peeled away, the yard fell back into its old proportions. The windmill squeaked precisely where it had squeaked at dusk. Stars held their indifference. Abel stood a long time in the door, breathing like a man counting. Mara came and stood beside him, close enough to feel the warmth off his ruptured sleeve. "You could have let them take me," she said. "Not my style," he said. "Styles change. Not the ones you can live with," he said. He sat finally and let her clean his arm. She worked with a concentration that made the simple holy. When she tied the last knot in the cloth, she cut the thread with her teeth and let it drop like a tiny dark bead to the floor. He thanked her with a look that did not embarrass either of them. They slept, if that's what you call closing your eyes. In the morning, the marks of trouble were only lines in dirt, easy to smooth with a broom. That's what the land does. It erases. It keeps. It tells you nothing about which. When his arm had scabbed into something he could move without counting the pain out loud, Abel said, "There's a place I want to show you." They rode out of their present and into his past. The old birthing shed stood the way memory does, shabbier than the mind, kept it stronger than anyone had a right to expect. The roof pitched wrong. The window held dust like a river holds silt. Inside, the air was close to the ribs of the house. Old heat sat where it had last been, as if time can be stored if the walls want to do it. "My wife died here," he said. The words came plain. The impulse to soften them with metaphor passed. He let them be what they were. Labor went bad. Midwife stuck out on the far road when the river ran. I did what I could. He stopped there because there was nothing honor earned by telling the rest. The room already knew. Mara looked at the walls like they were listening. She put her hand on the plank beside the door. It was the way a person touches a horse they're trying to convince to take a new bit, gentle, patient, a little amused by the futility of words. "I came here the morning I found you because I thought maybe I could stand in it long enough to own it again," Abel said. Turns out what I found was you. Mara swallowed, felt the throats working, felt a different kind of hunger stand up inside her. I thought I was just trying not to die, she said. Maybe there was more choosing in it than I let myself know. They worked without speaking. He handed shingles. She placed them and drove nails with the tidy strength of someone who learned accuracy to survive. They mended the window with a square of oiled cloth and tacked it down so the light came through in a steady amber the color of tea. They swept so hard the broom bristles softened and defined the floorboards again, each one a separate lane of memory. In the loft, Mara found a tin of buttons. Each carried a story. The little glass one from a Sunday dress, the bone one from a work shirt, the metal one from a coat too heavy to wear south of Kansas City. She brought them down, set them in a saucer, and mended Abel's shirt properly. She held the shirt up, and for a heartbeat, he saw a different figure measuring it against a different shoulder. The pain came like a weather change and passed the same way. He looked at Mara and felt the odd conjunction that grief and provision could live side by side without fighting. At dusk, they sat on the stoop. The land purpled the way land does just before it lets go of the day. A breeze combed the grass. Somewhere near a quail worried the evening with its peculiar what of a call. You can't save a thing by leaving it alone, Mara said, and the way she said it told him she meant herself as much as the cabin. You save it by staying with it while it hurts. Sometimes staying is the hurting, he said. She made a small sound that could have been a laugh or a sob if either had been allowed more room. All right, she said. Then we save what we can such that the rest has somewhere to fall. She looked at him then and did not look away. He took off his hat, not as a prelude, not as a claim, just as courtesy to a moment that deserved the honesty of one's full face. When they spoke of the future, they did it in the grammar of work. Fence, seed, roof, a little patch for beans, a trench for water, if the rain remembered them this year. They did not say the word home out loud. They did not have to. The wind said it for them, moving in the cottonwoods, with a sound like someone thinking forward. The weeks fell into a rhythm that felt like something other than running. Dawn light on the yard, Abel's steps to the barn. The rasp of a knife across a strap, the lift of a pail. Mara, at the table, husking silence into words with her hands. She spoke more now, not because she liked the sound, but because words used with care are a kind of shelter. She went to town once alone. She needed Threadneedle's coffee dignity. People looked and looked away in the same heartbeat. The woman at the counter who had been a girl who giggled and moved her mouth around the word half-breed like it was candy, took Mara's coins and counted them twice. You paying with your own money, she asked, meaning a dozen things at once. Yes, Mara said, and my own breath. On the way out, the sheriff tipped his hat. There was a kindness in it he had not yet earned, but wanted to. Small things accumulate. That night, Abel returned from the far pasture. With a limp he tried to hide, and a grin he did not. Calf stood today, he said, which was to say the world still goes on, and sometimes it goes on in ways that resemble mercy. They ate by firelight. Not much beans bread without softness, coffee dark as an old sin. It tasted good because they had cooked it, and because hunger is a seasoning that costs nothing and changes everything. Mara told him about her mother, without using the word mother. She talked about a woman who braided her hair in the wind's direction, who could read track like scripture, who taught her the patient language of water, how to listen for it under stone, how to feel the cold come up when your hands are deep, enough how not to beg it, just to find it. Abel told her about a field he had plowed to gather his grief into a geometry he could look at. He told her about the night he lay on his back outside the cabin and tried to talk to the stars, only to find they were better at listening than answering. He said it without drama, which made it more true. Their first touch was not the kind the world likes to make big of. She handed him a cup, and their fingers met, and did not hurry to leave. She looked at his hand, the scar crossing the knuckles like a white river, and he looked at her wrist where a rope burn had healed into a pale bracelet. The room felt small in the best way. When they finally came to each other, it was because there was nowhere else honest to go. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't payment. The body can be a place of harm. It can also be a place of repair when two people are careful. They were careful. They learned the map of each other the way you learn a new trail, by walking it slow, by paying attention to where the earth changes underfoot, by stopping when stopping is kinder than pressing on. Morning afterward, the world looked the same. A chipped plate, a chair with a missing rung, the windmill needing grease. But the quiet felt different, not empty now, but full like a church, after a hymn has climbed the air and settled into the wood. There was no ceremony to mark what changed. No ring, no paper, no pastor who knew their names. They marked it with labor, and with a little patch of garden she scratched into the earth behind the cabin. Soil packed under her nails. Abel brought her a feather he had found barred and bright. He set it in the lintel with a nail. Not superstition, a vow in another language. Word traveled in the lazy way of this country, that is to say, fast when it hurts you, slow when it might help. People began to look at them together the way people look at a bridge after the flood testing, with their eyes tapping their foot, once then stepping on it because they need to cross. Some nodded. Some spat where they thought it wouldn't be seen. But the sheriff, who had learned that justice is often just attention paid long enough, tipped his hat again when he saw them, and used Mara's name like he understood he had been saying it wrong in his head all along. Brent was gone into the system that eats men like him and spits them out meaner or meek. They did not build their days around his absence. They built around weather, around the slow-moving fact of seasons, around kindness that never once said its own name out loud. One night, when the heat lay on the roof boards and would not lift, Mara stepped outside and stood with her feet in the dusty yard. Stars hummed. Wind stroked the hair at her temple. Abel came to the threshold and leaned there like a man at a stable door, not wanting to startle a mare with a new foal. "This is your home," he said, and the words made something in him brave and something else in him soft. "It is ours," she said. He smiled into the dark, and the dark took it kindly. They slept that night, with the window open. The first cool whispered near morning, and with it the smell of rain, far off the kind that thinks about you for hours before it decides to come. Mara woke to that scent, and to the sound of Abel breathing steady and human. She lay there and watched the light find their walls. She felt the little feather above the door hold its watch. She felt the old room release a bit more of its grief into the sky, and take a bit more of their hours into its keeping. When the rain finally came days later, it didn't break anything. It stitched the dust together. It deepened the smell of mesquite and earth so that standing outside was like standing in a living mouth. They walked out into it and let it touch their faces. Mara tilted her head back and let the drops slide across her eyelids. Abel opened his hands to it as if he expected apology. The water offered no reason for itself. It just came, after the garden lifted its green shoulders beans, finding their string and climbing squash, putting out a foolishly hopeful vine. Abel cut channels with a hoe so the water could keep doing good after it had stopped looking like a miracle. Mara put her palm flat on the damp soil and felt the world say yes in a language that doesn't need verbs. "Stay," she said softly, not to Abel, not to the rain. Not even to herself exactly, but to the life that had come up in them without permission. "All right," the wind answered, moving the feather once, as if it nodded. They never spoke of forever. Forever is a word people use when they're trying to buy a little safety cheap. They spoke of evening chores and winter wood, and how to keep beans through a bad month. They spoke of going to town together next Sunday, to stand where the sun hits the church porch and listen to the hymn from outside, because sometimes that's enough religion for people who have already seen God in a man's hands when he ties a rope not to bind, but to save. And when night came, as it always does, they did not light every lamp. They let some corners rest dark, not out of fear, but because not everything needs to be looked at to be loved. If you rode by, you might not see anything worth telling. A small place, a fence line held together by thrift and stubbornness, two figures bending over the same task. But on some mornings the light lifted off their yard in a way that made you think of beginnings, and on some evenings the sound of their laughter, rare, low, like a creek, rediscovering its bed, carried as far as the mesquite stand, and made the birds settle without worry. The land is stingy with its approvals. When it gives them, no one can take them back. When winter hinted at the rim of the sky again, Abel oiled the windmill so it turned without complaint. Mara stitched a quilt that carried pieces of old life into new shapes. His wife's faded shawl, the blue strip from the dress she had crawled in the cloth, from the first sack of beans they bought together. She made the center square the color of firelight and set it crooked on purpose. "So we remember," she said. "Nothing sits straight at first. It doesn't have to hold." On the last day of that year, they took the rope knot Abel had used on Brent and tied it into a halter for the new colt. The knot held. It carried a different meaning now. A person can't always choose the threads given. Sometimes the only power is in the way you bind them. There were nights, and there will always be, when Mara woke and the old hand closed around her throat from a memory and wouldn't open right away. On those nights, Abel would sit up and put his palm between her shoulder blades and wait until the breath remembered itself. He did not tell her it was over. He did not lie to time. He just stayed. Sometimes staying is all the miracle a person gets. That spring, a girl from town came to the pump with both eyes purple from the man who thought a wedding makes a woman his. Mara washed the blood out of the girl's kerchief and taught her how to set a poultice. Abel built a small bed frame and put it under the shed roof in case the girl needed it. She did not that night. But the bed waited patient as a promise. At the first real thunder of summer, they walked to the door and stood like they had the day the rain came for them. Lightning stitched the sky with white thread too bright to stare at, and the thunder spoke the old truth. Everything that breaks open breaks something else open too. Abel reached for Mara's hand. His palm was warm and scarred and capable. She threaded her fingers through and squeezed once. "Home," he said. "Home," she answered. And the land which despises sentiment, but rewards constancy, held its peace and let them keep what they had made. The storm passed quick as a sigh. In its wake the air smelled of wet earth and juniper, and the moon rose through torn clouds like a coin rubbed clean. The water in the yard pooled and trembled with the leftover thunder small mirrors catching their shapes. Mara watched their reflections ripple and fade, then settle again side by side. "Funny," she murmured. "It's the first time I don't mind seeing myself." Abel smiled. "Maybe 'cause what you're seeing ain't just you anymore." The next morning everything shone. The horses nickered in the barn, their manes damp and sweet. The windmill turned smooth, each creak replaced by a rhythm that sounded almost like laughter. Mara walked barefoot to the garden, the soil dark and soft beneath her feet, and pressed seeds into it the way one presses a promise into the palm of a friend. Abel came behind her with a shovel, digging narrow furrows for the runoff to follow. Neither spoke much. Silence was still their truest language, but it was no longer heavy. It was shared. Days lengthened. June poured gold over the plains. Abel fixed the old fence line, the one he'd given up on years before. Mara painted the porch with leftover whitewash and hung a line of herbs to dry sage, wild mint, a few sprigs of cedar. When she laughed, the sound surprised them both, bright and full, a sound that had once been hunted out of her, but had found its way home. Sometimes she'd hum a tune her mother used to sing in the Mescalero tongue. Abel didn't know the words, but he felt them. The rhythm matched the turn of his hammer, the measure of his steps, the beat of a heart that had finally learned to rest. One evening near dusk, a rider came down the road. A neighbor from 3 miles out, a woman with a small son perched before her. She brought milk and news. "The sheriff says the town's put up a notice looking for someone to run the South Range come fall. Says they'd pay fair." Abel listened, nodded, and said he might. But when she left, he turned to Mara and shook his head. "We got all the land we need. Can't tend the whole world." Mara smiled. "Maybe just enough of it to feed a few souls." And so the days went. In August, the corn came high and strong, and Abel carved the initials MC into the new gatepost. Mara traced the letters with her fingertip. "What if someone asks what it stands for?" He shrugged. "They can guess." She smiled. "Mercy and courage, maybe." "That'll do," he said. At night, when the crickets tuned their dark violins, they'd sit on the steps with coffee, speaking of small things, how the creek bed might run next spring, whether the colt would stay, what color paint the house might wear someday if they ever. It had enough coin. The future no longer frightened them. It was just another landscape waiting to be crossed together. Autumn arrived soft and gold. The grass browned at the edges. The sky took on that clear, endless blue that belongs only to endings and beginnings. One morning, Mara woke to the sound of Abel splitting logs outside. She stood in the doorway and watched the easy rhythm of him, the arc, the breath, the fall, the clean crack of wood. Every swing felt like punctuation on a prayer. When he caught her watching, he gave a little half-grin. "Didn't know I had an audience." "You don't," she said. "Just a witness." "That'll do," he said again. When the first frost brushed the edges of the sage, they hung new curtains and tacked blankets along the wall seam. Abel built a small chest for her things. She filled it slowly, her mother's beads, the scrap of blue dress she had crawled in with a tin button from Abel's old coat. Together they made something that resembled a life sturdy and plain stitched from what had survived. Winter was kind that year. The snow came gentle, a single quilt thrown across the valley. They stayed close to the stove, reading what few books Abel owned, mostly old psalms and a tattered almanac. Mara mended Abel whittled small wooden toys he pretended were for barter, but really were for the simple comfort of shaping something harmless. He carved one like a small bird, smoothed it with beeswax, and set it on the windowsill. When the sun hit it, it looked alive. For luck, he said. By spring the land had learned their names. The soil recognized the prints of their boots. The horses whickered before dawn like they knew breakfast was coming. The creek behind the cabin found a little trickle again after years of silence, and they followed it laughing as it wound through rocks and reeds. "Water remembers where it's been," Mara said. Abel nodded. "So do people, if you let them." There was a morning that summer when Abel woke before light and found Mara already outside, standing barefoot in the dew. She was watching the horizon, her hair loose, her breath rising in slow ribbons. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Just thinking about how this feels like something worth staying alive for." Abel's throat tightened around the kind of gratitude that doesn't know words. He stepped forward, rested his hand on her shoulder, and together they watched the sun pull itself over the edge of the world. Years rolled away. Good years do quietly. The cabin weathered and held. Mara planted wildflowers along the fence, their colors soft as faded paint. Abel grew slower in the knees, but steadier in the eyes. He would sometimes stop mid-task and watch her move about the yard, her figure against the gold fields, the way her braids swung with purpose, and feel a kind of peace he'd once thought belonged only to the dead. On the 5th spring after the storm, the neighbors gathered for a barn raising. They brought pie-fiddle music, laughter that made the hills echo. Abel and Mara stood among them, hand in hand. Someone asked if they were married. Abel said, "In all the ways that matter," and nobody argued. Later that night, after the last lantern had gone dark and the fiddler's echo drifted off into coyote song, Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe the land keeps score? That it notices who tends it with kindness and who takes without asking?" "I reckon it does," he said. "And if we're lucky, maybe it remembers kindness a little longer." They stayed like that until the stars thinned with dawn. The wind moved through the grass in long, slow waves, whispering across the valley like a prayer, answered long ago and still echoing. When the sun rose, it caught the feather above the door. The light flared through it, scattering small rainbows against the wood. Mara touched it gently, as if greeting an old friend. Abel came up behind her, resting a hand on her back. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The air itself seemed to hum with the quiet truth they had built, that even in a land made of loss and dust, something tender can take root and live. And when travelers passed through years later, strangers chasing sky or story, they sometimes stopped at the fence, drawn by the neat rows of flowers and the smoke rising straight as prayer from the chimney. They'd say there was something different about that place, something steady, something blessed. They'd ask who lived there, and the folks nearby would answer simply, "Just two people who stay."